an Excelsior Studios original production. Throughout this podcast, sensitive subjects such as sexual assault, eating disorders, and suicidal thoughts will be mentioned. Listener discretion is advised. And throughout this podcast, sometimes I will use AI to bring social media posts or messages to life. While the voices you are hearing are fake, the words they are reading are 100% real. And I'll be sure to point this out throughout the program so you don't get confused.
Megan has been my favorite reality show for years. Whenever I was sad, whenever I was, having a bad day, I could always go to her Twitter account and just scroll through and see that she would have more major life events happen to her in 1 week than what would happen to you or I in a year. A car crash on Monday, she got fired on Tuesday, got evicted on Wednesday. These are the things she would claim on the regular.
Megan would friend and follow hundreds of individuals online and join tons of Facebook groups, looking for new people to connect with. Oftentimes, she would leave her new connections with a feeling of whiplash. 1 minute, they were giving a girl that looked like she needed a friend a chance. The next thing they knew, she was getting a bit overbearing. And soon enough, they're getting texts from multiple Google numbers claiming to be the governor of Indiana or Donald Trump Jr. No, I'm not kidding. Stories like that happened often to multiple groups across the internet. And interestingly, Megan typically did this in groups, not so much to individuals. She would join online or in-person communities, co-opt their language, and befriend the higher-ups of these groups. Then all hell would break loose with wild, over-the-top stories, which would grow to be too much for Megan's internet friends to handle, and she'd be on her merry way, willingly or unwillingly, depending on the group. So by the time the dust settled and Megan had moved on to the next community, these groups were left rumbling about what had happened. How did things get so intense so quickly from just one girl joining a Facebook group? Many couldn't help but keep up with her antics over the years, as things seemed to be growing more and more volatile with time. If you've ever been a part of a niche fandom on the internet, that's what following Megan feels like. And one of the best parts of belonging to a niche community is when you meet strangers who also belong to that community or follow the same thing, you have an instant connection. Well, on April 26, 2023, about 1,300 strangers realized we'd been following a niche online personality for years, and we had a lot in common to talk about, as we had witnessed behavior from Megan that we had never experienced from anyone else before. The group that came together was made up of a lot of different types of people, but many of us shared similar experiences. We were friended or followed out of the blue. We received a slew of comments or messages. We were often asked for donations to political campaigns or charity walks. For those who began to interact more with Megan, especially in Facebook groups, we began to witness alarming levels of posts coming from her day after day. Before people knew it, they were wrapped up in a web of lives formulated by Megan to varying degrees of extreme.
People would initially, kind of be sympathetic to her, and want to give her, make some space for her, because it seems like, she's clearly got a lot going on, and, they would welcome her into their lives. And then within 2 weeks, it's just like she's, taken a complete stranglehold over, she gets into these people's lives, and then they try to get off the ride, and then it's just immediate slander online.
So who was on the ride? Given that Megan spent what seemed like all of her time on social media, there were a lot of different groups that she had interacted with over the years. These groups included Indiana politicos, college Republicans and young Republicans nationwide, a network of evangelical pastors, including some abroad, a community of mental health influencers, a group of young women dedicated to making others feel included, and local Indiana community groups dedicated to helping their neighbors. In this episode, we'll explore the different communities Megan interacted with over the years, who would come together in the summer of 2023 to solve for crimes Megan had committed and was yet to be charged with, as well as the patterns these different groups observed of Megan throughout the years. I'm Amanda, and this is Don't Waste This Effing Podcast, the story of Megan Stoner. Don't Waste This Podcast is a completely independent podcast. It was written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Amanda, so you won't be interrupted by intrusive advertisements during the show. To support this independent podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, like and retweet if you're listening on X, and like and rate me 5 stars if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Oh, and share with a friend if you think that they would be interested in hearing this story. If you'd like to further support the podcast and learn how to start your own podcast like this one, I've created a course that teaches you how to do that from start to finish. I'll link that in the description in case you'd like to check it out. And one more thing, if you would like to hear more from me, maybe get your head checked out, but I do a daily podcast with my quick takes on U.S. politics, national security, foreign policy, and the Middle East conflict. That will be linked in the description as well.
Started, she showed up. I don't even know. She just kind of appeared, probably like in most of your lives. She just poof, here she is.
That's a former mentor of Megan's, recounting the days she met her in the Indiana State House. Megan was in middle school or high school at the time and had taken an interest in politics. She began spending a lot of time at the State House, asking how to learn how to lobby and to push legislation through the House. Popping up out of nowhere, but suddenly becoming very persistent in someone's life is a hallmark trait of Megan's, and the first phenomenon that many of the groups she infiltrated throughout the years cited as a common experience.
We felt like she was this high school. I mean, she was like, I don't know if it was middle school or freshman. She was very, very young. And we always, I mean, you guys all know this, when a young person wants to get involved as an activist and as somebody who, is a conservative, Republican, we are cheering to get help because there's not enough helpers. And so when a high schooler comes, we're like, all eyes on you.
The Indiana political scene is what introduced Megan to a large network of people who kept an eye on her from her high school years up until her arrest. And that's not because they wanted to babysit her or make fun of her. It's because in many ways it was hard to look away.
About was kind of Megan came on the political scene in Indiana, in Republican circles, around about 2014. She was about 16 years old. By the end of the 2016 cycle, she was essentially completely blackballed from all political circles. Um, and mostly that was because she was falsifying, political data on different campaigns she volunteered for. And just kind of doing some things that were harmful and doing more harm than good, and nobody wanted to work with her anymore. So she gets blackballed. I became aware of Megan in 2016. We were both volunteering on the Indiana Senate race at the time. It was a very hotly contested race that year. There were lots of interns. If you were a college kid and wanted to get involved in politics, that was sort of the race everyone was working on in the state that year. And I was a student at IU at the time, so I always did all my volunteer work in the Bloomington campaign office. Megan did everything in the Indianapolis office. Well, Megan sort of infamously forged campaign data, and I won't go into like the wonky specifics, but she very egregiously lied on a lot of survey responses, basically trying to make it look like she was getting through more phone calls and more door knocks than anyone else. And it only took like a few days, I think, for them to figure out what she was doing, and she got fired and told she could not participate on the campaign at all. And I heard about that, like, because we were there almost every day making phone calls, and somebody on the campaign told us, like, you guys are much better interns than, this stoner girl. And they told us what had happened. And we just thought it was the most absurd thing. None of us could fathom that anyone would ever do that. And so we all sort of, looked her up on social media as one does, and followed her. And she just sort of became this running joke because, like, she would post kind of absurd things on social media sometimes.
When the news got out that Meghan had been forging campaign data in 2016, the word was put out to everyone in the state, warning them not to work with her.
We basically told a lot of our friends within the liberty movement and Republican circles, we said, hey, don't let her volunteer for you. Don't let her come to events. She is really screwing things up, screwed stuff up for us. And this was about the same time that Todd Young was running for Senate for the first time. And that's when we kind of found out that she was faking data for them as well.
The political landscape in Indiana is very small, right? And I think in a lot of places it's small. Everybody knows everybody. Whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, we all run in very small circles.
That's Chloe again. You met her in the first episode. And Justin, both explaining kind of the fallout between Meghan and the Indiana Republican community. However, this was really only known by campaign leadership and volunteers that were around campaign offices frequently. People who were just starting to get involved with politics were sometimes deceived by Meghan's Facebook friends list and would interpret her as what Meghan said she was, even after she had been blackballed, a legitimate political operative.
I first encountered Miss Meghan circa 2016 is when I really started getting more heavily involved in politics, particularly at county level. And I was a pretty young and hungry Republican. And so anybody that was in my area, I was friending on Facebook. I really wasn't vetting them because I was really trying to learn all the state players and stuff. And Meghan popped up because I had so many common friends with her and people that I trust absolutely implicitly. And I was like, well, my goodness, if they're friends with her, I need to be friends with her too. So when her friend request popped up, because I mean, we had so many common people, I was like, absolutely, sure. She's clearly been vetted by all of these trusted and established Republicans in my area.
That's Ashley, a former Facebook friend of Meghan's. Back in 2016, Meghan friended her. Ashley accepted the request because she was beginning to get involved in the political world, and Meghan seemed to be involved. This isn't atypical in political circles, by the way. Instead of a quiet connection that liked her photos and political posts from time to time, Ashley began to feel bombarded by Meghan's constant comments and messages.
The second you let her in, she takes over. And I mean, I would wake up to 20, 30, 40 notifications. I mean, she was scrolling back through things from my high school.
Ashley wrote off Meghan's behavior as being socially awkward, but it kept getting worse. Finally, one day, Ashley quietly unfriended her.
And the final straw was I witnessed in real time on social media the death and resurrection of her father.
But for years, Meghan kept reaching out for donations of $5 to $10 a few times per year.
Classic, what I noticed retroactively in hindsight was very classic stalking behavior. She sort of figured out that after messaging me 20 times in a row, on the 21st time, I would kind of give in and throw a little something her way.
Meghan did this with people coming onto the political scene in Indiana, but also in young Republican and college Republican circles throughout the country.
It's not unusual for somebody that's political to befriend people on social media from all across the country. Politics is all about who you know and how well you know them. So to create a nationwide network when you're involved in politics, it's probably a good move. What was weird about it was that she used that network for shameless self-promotion in a way that was unique to Megan Stoner, and it wasn't found by anybody else. And it was a very weird level of narcissism that was probably unrivaled by any young politico, which is truly saying a lot because there's some really narcissistic people in politics.
That's the voice of Will Kramer, former college Republican chair of Georgia. Georgia's a long way from Indiana, who Megan had friended and messaged a few times before. They have never met before, but he believes a large portion of his friends list all dealt with her antics like he did.
Megan went through a period of time where she friended everyone who was in CRs, everyone. And she hit those people up for money for years. And lots of them kept up with like the crazy posts from this girl who asked them for money that they had never met.
Megan did this in Facebook groups and online communities that weren't political as well, such as the Spice Girls Facebook group.
So Spice Girls is basically just an online community to help millennial-ish folks figure out life. People talk about how to cut their hair, how to deal with apartment utilities, roommate advice, buying your first home, anything and everything. It really has played a huge role in my life. I actually found 2 of my bridesmaids for my wedding through the community. And it's always been really incredibly welcoming, inclusive, which I think is why Megan was drawn to it.
That's Alex. You met her in the first episode. Alex got involved with the Spice Girls because of a niche crafting community that she was a part of, and she has no idea how Megan found the Spice Girls group. Similarly to the story with Ashley, Megan became a bit overbearing.
The interesting thing about the way that Spice Girls worked is, there would be the main group, but sometimes you would want to have, these, really niche conversations. So there was a bunch of subgroups that were created just, as the span of like the expansion of discussion. And the interesting thing was that it wasn't even just the main group that Megan had to be part of. She had to be part of all of them. She was in a pets group. She joined a movie group, a binge watching Netflix group. She even she wanted to be in a mom group because she wanted to be a mom one day. She joined the sexual assault group and the sexual assault survivor group because she said she was a survivor. And she also joined the mental health group because she said she struggled with mental.
A hallmark of the Spice Girls group is inclusivity. While some members grew annoyed by Megan's behavior in the group, the girls didn't know what to do about it.
Megan's posts in the group became very intense, to say the least, and incessant. It was almost like, kind of near the middle and the end, she was really treating the group like her own personal diary. It started with sort of every mundane thought or feeling she ever had, she would share. For example, she once asked if anyone else also bobby pinned their bangs back to keep their hair out of their face. The most memorable posts were her requests for fashion advice, where she really dressed in outfits that I think like our parents, like the boomer generation, would wear. Um, and she never actually took our advice and would become frustrated if we gave her advice that she didn't really want. She had a weird thing with blazers. If you were there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. She had to put a blazer with everything, regardless if it looked bad or not. The other interesting part was there was a lot of political posts, which the group didn't allow, but she was very sly and like sidestepped those rules. And in hindsight, it kind of made me wonder if she was looking to see what she could and couldn't get away with. And this was around the time of the 2016 election and then beyond, which, as we know, was a really contentious election cycle. But she would like post pictures of herself with Mike Pence saying something along the lines of like, "Oh, this is the best day of my life. Don't make this political."
Eventually, Megan got to be too overbearing for the girls in the group. They lost a significant amount of trust in her. This was an online community where girls would share their deep, dark secrets, particularly about topics that are hard to speak to others about, such as mental health struggles and sexual assault. The girls felt Megan was not to be trusted with some of the information they were divulging. More on that in a later episode.
People would be bringing ideas forward, and we were really trying to figure out like, okay, like she's one of us now. Like is there, how can we help her? And it just became so frustrating and so infuriating that somebody just had to boot her.
So while the Spice Girls group was understood to be made up of girls who went out of their way to be inclusive, it got to the point where they couldn't handle her anymore. She was just too overbearing. And like the girls and the rest of the group were examining, once they got rid of Megan's overwhelming presence in the group, many of the group members quietly continued following what she was up to, checking her bizarre Facebook and Twitter posts from time to time. Notably, she didn't always come in so hot, though. There are other people that she kind of slow burned with, such as Edward Ma, who she met through a community of mental health influencers on Twitter.
I live in Canada, Nova Scotia to be more specific. I'm a full-time software engineer, a volunteer first responder. I also do a lot of mental health advocacy on Twitter, mostly talk about my childhood trauma, like the stuff that I'm going through, the healing that I'm doing. And occasionally I do a bit of social activism if the mood strikes me.
Being that Megan also tweeted often about her mental health struggles, it only made sense that she would begin to network with other mental health advocates online. That's how Megan and Edward met.
Yeah, eventually we talked to me like one day on just like private messages. I don't remember. I think eventually met to me on private messages or something, and then we started talking. Eventually we started talking on the phone for a little bit.
What's interesting about the story of Megan and Edward is she did not get overbearing with him in the beginning, like she did with the other examples. That didn't come until much later. They chatted casually a few times a week for about a year before she ever got to be too much for him. But eventually, that friendship had to come to an end as well. More on that story in the coming episodes as well. Notably, Megan would find herself joining groups that it's kind of hard to kick people out of. It's one thing to kick people out of unpaid political volunteer positions, which is uncommon unless an individual does something especially egregious. When it came to the Indiana political community, Megan did just that. But many of the other groups that Megan joined were ones that were purposefully inclusive. The Spice Girls, the mental health community, and maybe most notably the church community. I mean, who gets kicked out of churches? Well, Megan did throughout the years, because she would get overbearing and inappropriate with different pastors as well.
Up through, she goes through this church phase that kind of continued through like last summer when she started going to a different church in Chicago, made some pretty outlandish claims about the pastor there.
Given her record going to different churches, this also prompted Megan to join the Church Hurt community, a mostly online community which deals with a variety of issues within church congregations.
Into sort of this pissing match with, I-Town, which is one of the biggest mega churches here in Indianapolis. She started a podcast about, some of the abuse within that church, and I-Town itself is a part of a bigger organization of churches known as ARC churches. And she tried to start a podcast about, abuse that happens in different ARC churches and, I-Town more specifically. And she she really didn't get anywhere with that, I don't feel like, but she did try for, a couple years there to really smear that name and put some really negative stuff out there about that particular church.
So much like Megan's other antics, she seemed to start this feud kind of out of the blue with a massive Indianapolis area megachurch. And interestingly, she doesn't claim abuse for herself against this church. And at least nowhere have I seen her claim that. She's always calling attention to abuse that others experienced, which is atypical because she typically spoke about abuse that she herself experienced. So, like Justin said in that clip, she started a podcast called The Sinking Ark. And ARC stands for Associated of Related Churches, which is the longer conglomerate of churches that I-Town belongs to. And she kind of did this to boost her status in the church hurt community. Although, just as quickly as she got into that community, she was on the outs with them as well. Like, actually kicked out. Bloggers were writing blogs to their audiences and letters to their congregations about how dangerous she was at the end of that stint. Again, more on this in coming episodes. So, Megan had a long history of throwing herself into online and in-person communities, becoming overbearing, and eventually leaving these communities as quickly as she entered them. But as she left these communities, or at least was kind of kept at an arm's length by these communities, many of them noticed another pattern about her. It was her just complete shamelessness, her brazen nature, unlike anyone else the people in these groups had ever experienced before. Perhaps the most fascinating thing about Megan, and if we're being honest, the thing that kept people following her from a distance, as if she's a TV character, was her just shamelessness. Megan does not seem to have a bone in her body that experiences embarrassment.
But the thing that stands out to me about this period of Megan's life is she very quickly was ostracized from Indiana Republican politics. She wasn't really welcome at events, but sometimes she would randomly show up. You would be at like a random fundraiser and Megan would just come walking in the door and everybody would get really excited, Stoner's here. And but she would sit in the back by herself. She wouldn't talk to anybody, or maybe talk to one or two people that she knew and felt close enough to, but she wouldn't really work the room like most people would. Um, and it was just her presence was very bizarre.
So this is like classic Megan. She knew she wasn't really welcome in political circles anymore, but she would show up anyways. And honestly, I really admire this trait about Megan. If she demonstrated this tenacity and followed through on her word, Megan would probably be an actual high-powered political operative or a politician. Megan wasn't only just showing up to these political events, she also would present to other people and on social media as if she worked for these politicians.
Literally, on my first day of work, I was told, hey, there's this individual, Megan Stoner, who's going to say that she works for you, that works for the governor. She does not. I was literally warned about her in the first 30 minutes of me working for Governor Pence's reelection campaign. And over the course of the next six months, where, there's a lot of intense scrutiny, especially, come May, June, July, as Governor Pence became the focus of, a lot of rumors about him becoming the vice presidential nominee for, soon to be President Trump. There was a lot of increased media attention, and there was not a week that went by that I did not get an email saying, hey, did you hire Megan Stoner? This is a terrible mistake, right? And because Megan was going around saying, I'm a senior speechwriter for Governor Pence's reelection campaign. I'm a senior policy writer. I'm doing this. And in fact, she had no actual role for campaign or administration in any way whatsoever. And literally not a week went by that it was like playing whack-a-mole. One field staffer would turn her away only for another to show up, say, hey, I got this great potential intern, Megan Stoner, says she's been working as a policy writer for the Pence campaign or the Pence administration, and we'd have to fill them in. We literally did have field staff that were assigned to keep her away from then Governor Pence, taking selfies or otherwise implying that they were some way connected to Governor Pence, and trying to get involved in that media attention.
That's what a former Pence staffer told a Twitter space about his experience working for Governor Pence during a very crucial time in his campaign and his experience with Megan Stoner. Think about that. This man is running to be eventually the vice president of the United States, and they have to play what he describes as whack-a-mole about this 19-year-old running around Indiana. It's really bizarre when you think about it like that. She also kept applying for political jobs in Indiana despite knowing she was blacklisted. And eventually, she started sending in false names and fake Google numbers on her resumes. So, again, she knew they wouldn't hire her under her name and number, but she kept applying anyway. And this happened more than once. So, not only did she keep showing up and keep applying for jobs and keep presenting as if she worked for these people, but she posted on her social media pages as if she was some high-powered political consultant. Everyone knew that wasn't true, and I mean everyone, especially in Indiana. But she posted like she was, and she didn't unfriend the political context that she had burned in the past, so they could just watch it. And that brazenness of Megan's did not just apply to the political world. It applied to other groups that Megan interacted with over the years as well.
She would go into the survivors group and also the mental health group, and she would post these really horrible and really graphic posts in these two groups that, I mean, like, even as somebody who used to be an advocate for survivors, the level of detail that she would share would be off-putting, to say the least. There was a specific instance where she was claiming that she was working with journalists from a prominent Indiana newspaper, and she said they were harassing her. And she said that she received a giant box of tissues with a card saying, "These are for your flashbacks." And she said that this came from the journalists that she was working with. At the time, someone else in the group was in their own journey of working with a journalist to share their story and was dealing with being harassed for coming forward. And they were receiving weird messages, having really strange interactions. And Megan basically took this person's story and, changed basically who was doing the harassing and some of these little minor details within a day or two of this person's posts.
So think about that. Megan was shameless enough to steal stories of girls in her online communities and present them as her own, only making slight changes to the stories just days later. Like, imagine the gall of that. And I'm giving kind of dramatic examples. These are serious stories. But in her day-to-day, she behaved in just kind of a bizarre fashion that others picked up on that wasn't so overt and dramatic. Megan's just unapologetic about it. And the lighthearted stories along the way sprinkled in there are maybe why people didn't start speaking out until much later, but just kind of followed along because it was fun. Here's a more lighthearted story of Megan's shamelessness. This story takes place in a Noblesville Buy Nothing group. It's a Facebook group.
It's basically one of those sites where people post things that they have that they're getting rid of and they're giving away for free. So it's like a really nice community group. And I had a couple baby gates, and someone had commented back and was like, "Hey, I really need these. I just got a new dog."
This is Alyssa, and she has kind of a long story with Megan that you'll hear unfold as well. But when she started to get messages about baby gates she had put up in this Buy Nothing group, she recognized the person that was messaging her for them.
I had seen this girl post in the group before asking like really weird questions. They would be like, can somebody come charge my Tesla? Or can someone come walk my dog? Or, like there's this weird questions. Like, this is a Buy Nothing group, She's like, so, I need this baby gate. And I'm like, sure, like, you can come by and get it. And this was at like 6 p.m. at night. And she's like, okay, I'm on my way back home now. I'll stop by and grab it on the way. I'm like, okay. And I had sat some other things out for people that were going to get them the next morning. And so I sat the baby gate out, and there was a bag of stuff out there. And mind you, we have a doorbell camera. And so it's like 10:30, and I was like, okay, I'm going to bed. Like, your stuff's on the porch. Just grab it whenever you can, kind of thing. And she comes by at like 1:30 in the morning to grab this baby gate and takes the bag of stuff with the baby gate next to it. They were just some baby clothes, so like it didn't do her any.
I just love that story because not only is driving around really late at night just so typical of Megan, but just the shamelessness of Megan requesting services from strangers, which is totally outside of the norms of this Facebook group she was in. And also just like, think of how rude it is to show up to a stranger's house that's doing you a favor, giving you something for free. So late at night, like at 1:30 in the morning, especially when like presumably they have children, right? That could be sleeping because Megan was picking up a baby gate. So that's the first time Megan interacted with Alyssa, but not the last. So stay tuned throughout the series for the rest of that story. So, as you can see, some of these instances are funny, some are alarming, but it just seems to be a personality trait of Megan's that everyone she interacted with, or at least the ones that got back to me for this podcast or presented their stories on Twitter Spaces, noticed as a common theme of Megan's over the years. And there's a third personality trait of Megan's that people also noticed and reigned true throughout the groups that Megan frequented. And it's that she's very aware of this community of people that she has wronged in her life. And she frequently interacts with them, but not apologetically. Instead, adversarially, as if they're just characters in the reality show of her life. So you've gotten off the ride that is Megan Stoner. You gain enough clarity once you've removed yourself from the situation to realize how brazen she is and that she's not stopping her behavior and instead just moving on to the next group of people. That might make you upset. So much so that you may want to call her out for it. If you feel like that, you wouldn't be alone. A community of women came together and started to do just that to Megan. And she knew that they were doing that and had an interesting way of dealing with them.
So I've stayed pretty silent in hopes that things would fade away, but I'm sitting here making funeral plans for both of my parents. My mom was shot at last night as a result of drama on social media. My dad's blood pressure is 60/50 at the moment, and we have no idea what the next moment holds. Melanie, you just lost your mom, but yet have bullied me on here. And if you can tell people to stop coming to my door as I'm trying to meet with a minister to go over funeral plans, that would be great.
That's an AI voice of Megan reading perhaps her most infamous social media post ever. It includes all of the best facets of a Megan post, the most dramatic life event you've ever heard of, 2 dead parents, a lie uncovered halfway through. She's planning 2 funerals with a minister, but her dad still has a blood pressure, so he's still alive. And spoiler alert, both of her parents were very much alive at the time of this post. Unfortunately, both have since passed. Tagging one of her haters and blaming her parents' deaths on her haters from social media. Megan really outdid herself with this one. So this is a masterpiece for multiple reasons. Again, evidence as to why people like to follow along with her. And the most important part of this post is the fact that she calls out the haters. And I edited out the person's full name, but Megan tagged her in the post. I don't want to dox her. So this is how Megan would respond to the growing community of people who were calling out Megan's antics and increasingly criminal behavior online. This community of people frequented local Facebook groups like chatter pages and Buy Nothing groups around the Indianapolis area. Megan was a frequent subject of these groups because she used them to scam individuals in the rent scam, and also business owners from the community would post in these groups to warn other community members about Megan as well. because Megan would scam their businesses from time to time. Megan wouldn't just quietly block the group and move on, though. A lot of the time, she would kind of fight back with these groups. And that might seem really weird. And while Megan is definitely a unique character, I can't put the blame solely on Megan for this. There's just a really unique decorum to these groups. It's like nothing I've ever seen before, and I'm not the only one who sees it.
They're insane. These groups are wild. Like, you don't even understand until you're in one. Like, people will attack you for that. You could just make a bad review of something and people are attacking you immediately. It is crazy. Like, be prepared. You have to be so prepared.
So that's how Alyssa described being a part of these Facebook groups. Here's a message I received read by an AI voice when some of these commenters started coming after me last summer.
I haven't lived in Indy in 20 plus years, but I'm home a lot, and I gotta say the gossip in that area can be strong. I've lived in London, New York, Chicago, and now LA, and I've still never seen anything like Hamilton County keyboard warriors.
Long story short, last summer I held a Twitter space with Justin, kind of discussing what was going on with the ongoing legal case against Megan. And some of the members of these Facebook groups in Indiana didn't like that I did that. And other members of the community noticed the comments that they were sending to me and privately messaged me on Facebook about them. You have to remember, I'm not from Indianapolis, so I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I got involved in the story. And I guess this is kind of what these groups are. A lot of people in Indianapolis, I guess, participate in these.
We are dealing with mostly the detectives of Noblesville here, which is a branch off Noblesville and Censored, which is known to just make no sense and be unhinged.
That's another message I received from a local resident of these Facebook pages, read by an AI voice as well. And I'm including these just to show the dynamic of how these groups work, because I think it's important to understand. But let me back up, because this might get confusing. So these Facebook groups are mostly chatter pages. And chatter pages are Facebook groups that are kind of city, county, or community specific. And I guess they exist all over the US, maybe even abroad as well. These pages are for local community members to connect, look for housing, look for jobs, or chat about just things going on in the community. Noblesville is about a 10-minute drive from Fishers, where Megan was living at the time. And many of the women in the Megan Stoner's Chronicle Facebook group, which would come to be after Megan got arrested, came from the Noblesville chatter group, and actually 3 layers deep in the Noblesville chatter pages. So Noblesville chatter is the main group, and as Chloe noted in her Twitter thread, Megan found many of the victims of her rental scam in chatter pages like that one, which is why she was a common character discussed in them. So not only would victims of her rental scam warn community members about her, but other local business owners would do the same thing. Because Megan was so frequently spoken about in the main Noblesville chatter page, the admins started to delete posts about Megan because the group became enveloped by her antics, and some of them were kind of mean, which caused people to split off and create another group called Noblesville Chatter Uncensored. I guess that group also became enveloped by the Megan saga or drama between the group's participants, so they split off and created a third page called Noblesville Chatter Investigates. That's how it's been described to me, is that Megan is the catalyst for the creation of the 2 spin-off Noblesville groups. And the thing about the members of these groups, especially Noblesville Investigates, is that they've been calling out Megan for years. They felt it's their duty to protect their community from her. And to be honest, had they not worked diligently to protect people from her antics for years, Megan may have been able to get away with way more scams. So while if you go through Megan's social media posts from over the years, you might start to believe that she's been the victim of this online gang of bullies out to get her, because that's how Megan often spun this relationship. Understand that Megan wasn't innocent and also participated in the personal attacks back and forth as well. And this symbiotic relationship that Megan had with the people she deemed adversaries or her haters, or more accurately, people Megan knew that she had wronged, this is one of the hallmark details of the Megan Stoner story. And interestingly, she often spun the haters narrative in her favor, which coincidentally made people who weren't aware of her scams and antics potentially look at her as more of an authority. So here's an example of that.
We put out a request to like the Indiana Young Republicans, like, hey, we need volunteers. About 3 days out, we have all these volunteers signed up, and we see a name, and we aren't familiar with it. It's like Morgan something. It's Morgan S. It's not Megan. It's Morgan. And we're like, who the hell is this? And we weren't suspicious that it's Megan. We're just like, we don't know who this is. So this person walks up to us. Well, I have no clue who they are. So Jeff emails her and says, hey, can we have your phone number, whatever. Well, they give a phone number, and it's Megan Stoner. And we know immediately Megan's going in. She volunteered to stand outside of the speaker events, and we all knew immediately she's going to stand out there for all of 30 seconds, walk into the event, and not work it. And she doesn't want to pay, she doesn't want to pay to attend the event. She just wants to go for free. So we email back saying, hey, we thank you so much for wanting to volunteer, but we're actually have more volunteers than needed, and I hope you have a great weekend. And a normal person would have been like, oh, okay, cool, thanks. Thanks for letting me know. Immediately, because we were right, Megan did just want to get into these events for free. She starts live tweeting at me about how we don't want to have her in the party, and she's been a dedicated volunteer and whatever. Well, it died down that night. And then, like 2 days later, they had this journalist out of California. She was a journalist, not really a journalist, but whatever, and started interviewing Megan at Starbucks. Horrific background sound. You could barely hear what she was saying. But she was talking about how we don't want her in the party because, she's too conservative, and the young Republicans are all these moderates and all this other crap. And we're like, what the hell are you talking about? And they do a 5-part interview saga about how Megan's just too conservative for the party, and that's why we don't want leaders like her. And it was a perfect example of, like, if she didn't get what she wanted, she wouldn't let it go.
As you can see from the story, Megan's shamelessness to participate in political activities in Indiana was once again on full display. This happened years after she was excommunicated from volunteering. And not only that, but she got adversarial and aggressive on social media when the organizers of the event, even though she knew that she used a fake resume and a fake name to apply, because she knew that they wouldn't accept her to volunteer in the first place, she still got adversarial and aggressive with them on social media. What's even funnier about this is she took the situation and spun it and got herself an interview on an up-and-coming journalism site that is now defunct. Maybe we understand why. For a 5-part series on how she was... Well, I have the interview. I'll just play a clip of it.
With these people, but the Twitter backlash that I have faced in the last 24 hours has absolutely been out of just... I never thought I would face this backlash. Being told that I'm not a loyal Republican, being told that I'm taking advantage of the party, these things I have never been called my entire life, and all of a sudden I'm being called these things. What a shame. But I will continue to be a voice. I will continue to move and shake. And I think a lot of it comes down to jealousy. I think a lot of them are jealous that they've not had the monumental impact that I've had, and that's fine.
Talk to me about some of these accounts on Twitter. Are they parody accounts? Are they real people?
Yes. There is one parody account that has absolutely trolled me for the last 18 hours. They have questioned everything in my life. Apparently, I don't own the car that I'm sitting out at the Starbucks looking at right now. Everything in my life they have questioned. They've wanted me to meet them at a parking garage to show them the car that I own. That apparently all I do is lie. When I'm sitting here looking at my car that I drove to this location, I've been open about, you know, the car I own. I do own a Tesla. I've been pretty open and transparent on Twitter, and I like to brag, to be quite honest, because I've worked very hard, and you know, I like to have nice things, and that's, you know, never a bad thing. Capitalism works. But you know, I think a lot of it is just jealousy that I've gotten a piece of legislation through and that I've made a name for myself, like it or not. And here I am.
The best thing about this interview is that she's sitting in a Starbucks on Starbucks public Wi-Fi. No headphones, background noise and all. Add this to Megan's tab. She seems to be someone who shamelessly FaceTimes in public. I also love that she brings up the Tesla. Don't worry, there's a lot more to that story as well. I'm laughing at Megan from this, and you probably are too, but think about this from an outsider's perspective. Even though Megan was completely lying about this narrative, she wasn't kept out of Indiana politics for being too conservative. She was kept up because they couldn't trust her based on her actions from years prior. To an outsider, though, they might look at this and say, well, Megan got interviewed on a news site, so she must be a legit operative in some capacity. She drives a Tesla. She must be getting money from somewhere. In the interview, they also talk about anonymous troll accounts directed at Megan. Another thing that's true. And in a way, that can be spun as well to make her look somewhat legit. There have been anonymous Twitter accounts dedicated to exposing Megan for years, most notably Greg's Mustache. And I reached out to them for comment for this podcast. Unfortunately, they didn't get back to me. But again, put yourself in an outsider's shoes. If there's dedicated troll accounts to Megan, maybe she's being bullied. Or maybe she really is as powerful as she said she was, and outsiders are trying to take her down. So, in a uniquely Megan way, because of her shamelessness, because she always seemed to be seeking out a new group of people to either lie to, steal from, or really just gain attention from, she would spin all of her antics that she got herself into in her favor. And in some cases, the people that just didn't know any better could have bought into the bullshit. And by the way, this symbiotic relationship has carried on to this day with her so-called haters. Megan frequently calls the people that put her in jail, and she knows they put her in jail. They openly speak about it with her, but Megan sometimes seems to bat it down or pretend it didn't happen or act like they owe her something now. She's acting this way about this very podcast.
I submitted a guilty plea. Obviously, I admitted to it. I did a fucking guilty plea. What more do you people want from me? I don't know what society wants. I've pled fucking guilty.
I think that's retarded. I'm sorry. I mean, I guess she's going to have to tell me who she interviewed. I don't know. Because there's no way to listen to the podcast in here. It's the right thing to do, is to interview the accused.
That's a recording from a call from Megan last week from jail. She seemed to want to stop the production and rollout of the podcast or have control over it in some way. And she thinks that she can make demands, again, of the person that put her in jail. Again, just the shamelessness. So these are some notable qualities of Megan that all of the groups of people that have interacted with her over the years seem to have picked up on as well. And as we continue the series, you'll hear even crazier stories than this one and hear the ones that were half told in here come to fruition. But you'll notice these tendencies over and over again. There's two notable figures in Megan's life I left out of this episode. And that's her parents. In fact, I left out her early life as a whole because people didn't really know a whole lot about Megan's early life beyond her involvement in politics in high school. So next week, we'll do a deep dive into Megan's childhood and try to understand how someone like Megan comes to be in the first place. So that's all for now. I'll see you next Thursday. I'm Amanda, and this is Don't Waste This Fucking Podcast, the story of Megan Stoner.